And just before he turned off the light, he sat for a moment in the blue dark of the guest room, on the floor where he'd been sleeping for 3 weeks, and he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. Not just about the interview, something else, something he couldn't name precisely. In the master bedroom, Maria sat at the edge of the bed with the index card in her hands. She read it. She read it again. She looked at the handwriting, his careful architectural script, the slant of a man who drew plans for a living, and she thought about the word, please. Richard Brooks did not say please easily, had never said it easily. It was the particular stubbornness of a man who had grown up believing that asking for help was the same as admitting weakness. He had written it anyway. She folded the card in half. And the narrator says this, quietly, carefully. At that moment, Maria Brooks faced the hardest decision of her marriage. Not because she didn't love him, but because she did. And because love, when it's been hurt enough times, sometimes stops behaving like love and starts behaving like a wound. 6 a.m. The alarm on Richard's phone went off. He reached for it in the dark of the guest room, silenced it, waited. Silence. He lay there for another minute, giving himself one more minute. The way you do when you're nervous about something important, and the warm dark feels like protection. Silence. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, just for a moment. In the master bedroom, Maria woke at 5:58, 2 minutes before his alarm. She woke the way she always woke, completely, cleanly, with no gradual transition from sleep. One moment asleep, the next sitting up with her eyes open. She listened. She heard the alarm. She heard its silence. She got up. She stood in the hallway outside the guest room for a moment. Her hand went to the door handle. She stood there. In her other hand, she held a piece of paper. She'd written on it the night before, in the dark, lying on her side of the bed that had been only her side for 3 weeks. She stood at that door for 23 seconds. The narrator counts them. 23 seconds. Then she walked back to the master bedroom. She placed the note on the nightstand on Richard's side, the side he hadn't slept on in 3 weeks. She got back into bed, and she lay there with her eyes open, listening. The guest room was quiet. At 6:47, when the house was still completely quiet, she got up. She walked to the guest room. She opened the door. Richard was asleep on the floor, not the bed, the floor. His arm was folded under his head, his phone 3 inches from his hand, his alarm set and silent. She stood in the doorway. She was very still. Then she walked to the nightstand, beside the guest room bed, picked up a sticky note and a pen, and wrote, "Wake up. You have an interview." She placed it on the pillow beside him. She left. She closed the door quietly behind her. She went to the kitchen. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. And she waited. Richard woke up at 10:42 a.m. He knew before he opened his eyes. The quality of the light was wrong. Too full, too bright. Not the thin gray of early morning, the solid, unambiguous light of mid-morning, the light that shows up after the world has already been moving for hours. He grabbed his phone. 10:42. He didn't move for 3 full seconds. Then he moved very fast. He sat up. He grabbed the pillow to look for his phone case and found instead a sticky note. "Wake up. You have an interview." He read it, read it again. He looked at the time on the note. She hadn't written a time, but the timestamp on his phone said 10:42. The interview had been at 8:30. He had missed it by 2 hours and 12 minutes. He sat on the floor of the guest room with the sticky note in his hand and the specific, devastating silence of a person whose life has just rearranged itself around them. And then, the silence in him turned into something else, something louder. Something that had been building for weeks and weeks and weeks, pressed down and compressed and made smaller and smaller until it had nowhere left to go but out. He walked into the kitchen. Maria was sitting at the table. Her coffee cup was in her hands. She was looking at him. She said nothing. He held up the note. "What is this?" he said. She said nothing. "What is this, Maria?" "It's a note," she said quietly. "I asked you to wake me up. I left you a note. I said please. I said this means everything. I left you a note. At what time? I don't know the exact. At what time?" "Richard, what time did you leave that note?" A long pause. "After 6, she said. "After 6, he repeated. "I had an interview at 8:30, the most important interview of my career. And you left a note. After 6. I tried." "Don't." His voice had gone very quiet, which was, in their marriage, worse than loud. "Don't tell me you tried. I stood outside that door. Then why didn't you knock?" The question rang through the kitchen. Maria's jaw tightened. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, the specific control of a woman who has a great deal to say and is choosing, right now, to say very little of it. "Because," she said, "for the last 3 months, every time I have tried to speak to you, you have made me feel like I was interrupting something more important." The kitchen was very quiet. "And last night," she continued, her voice still even, still careful, "I made a decision that I am not proud of. And I will own that, but I need you to understand. I have been trying to talk to you for months, and you have been too busy winning our arguments to notice that you were losing your wife." She set down her coffee cup. She stood up. She walked past him. She didn't slam a door. She closed it quietly, which was worse. The house became something different after that morning. Not a home, not a battlefield either. Something in between. A place where two people lived at careful angles to each other, navigating the geometry of shared space without intersection. No notes. Not a single one. The refrigerator was bare. The bathroom mirror was bare. The television had no note on it, and the remote sat on the left side of the couch cushion undisturbed. 3 days passed. Richard threw himself into the Meridian proposal anyway. He told himself he could still reach out, explain, request a reschedule. He typed 3 different emails to the contact address and deleted all 3. He called the number once and hung up before it connected. He did not tell Maria any of this. He sat in his office and worked. And sometimes he stopped working and just sat there, thinking about the note in her handwriting. "Wake up. You have an interview." He kept coming back to something he couldn't resolve. She had known. She'd been awake. She'd gone to the door. She had said so herself. And she hadn't knocked. But she had also said something he kept replaying. About 3 months. About losing his wife. About being too busy winning to notice what he was losing. On the 4th night, he went to the kitchen at 11 p.m. for a glass of water and found a single note on the kitchen table. Not Maria's handwriting, not his. The rounded, careful, slightly childlike handwriting from before. It said, "She stood at that door for 23 seconds. She wanted to knock. Ask her why she didn't." He stood in the dark kitchen with this note for a very long time. He looked around. The house was dark, silent, locked. The alarm system was on. No one had come in. He picked up the note. He took it back to the guest room. He lay on the floor, still refusing the mattress, as if physical discomfort was the appropriate penance for something he couldn't name. And he thought about 23 seconds. What do you do at a door for 23 seconds? You decide. You stand there and you feel the weight of every single thing that's happened, and you decide whether to knock or walk away. Maria had walked away, but she had stood there first, for 23 seconds. He thought about that for a long time, and when the thought settled into something he could hold, he reached for his phone. Not to call her. He didn't call. He opened his email. He had 47 unread messages. He scrolled, and there, sent 6 days ago, 2 days before the interview, buried under vendor quotes and contractor schedules, and a newsletter he'd never unsubscribed from, an email from Meridian Corporate Partners. Subject line: Rare. Design proposal invitation. Schedule adjustment. He opened it. He read it. He read it again. He sat up from the floor. The email had been sent at 4:17 in the afternoon, 2 days before the interview. It said, Mr. Brooks, we wanted to reach out ahead of Thursday's meeting. Due to an internal scheduling conflict, we have moved the design proposal interviews. The new time for your appointment is Friday, February 14th at 9 a.m. Please confirm receipt of this message at your earliest convenience. We look forward to meeting with you. Friday, not Thursday. The interview had never been Thursday morning. It was Friday. Friday was tomorrow. Richard sat in the dark of the guest room and felt the ground shift beneath him. He had missed nothing. The interview, the Meridian interview, the most important meeting of his professional life, was still ahead of him. He had not lost the contract. He had lost his mind. He scrolled up through his inbox, found the original invitation, read it again, and there it was. He had misread the date. He had been so certain it was Thursday, so absolutely, stubbornly certain. He had read Thursday into a date that had always said Friday. He had been carrying the devastation of a loss that hadn't happened. He had exploded at his wife over a missed interview that he hadn't actually missed. He had spent 4 days in silence over a wound that he had inflicted on himself. The narrator is quiet for a moment. Then, there is a particular kind of humbling that happens when you discover that the disaster you've been grieving was one you invented, when the evidence you were certain of turns out to be a misreading, when the story you told yourself, the story in which you were wronged, in which someone failed you, turns out to be a story you wrote yourself, with your own certainty and your own pride as the ink. Richard sat there for a long time. Maria had not sabotaged him. Maria had stood at his door for 23 seconds and then walked away, not because she wanted him to fail, but because she was hurt, and because being hurt for long enough changes the way you move through a room. She hadn't cost him the interview. Their silence had. His anger had. His unread inbox had. His phone, which he now checked. His phone, which he always kept on loud, which had somehow been on silent for 4 days, which he now remembered, silenced during their argument about the electricity, and never turned back on. The email notification had been there, waiting, silent, like everything else in this house. He got up from the floor. He walked down the hall. He knocked on the master bedroom door. No answer. He opened it slowly. Maria was awake, lying on her side, facing away. He could tell by her breathing she'd been awake for a while. He sat on the edge of the bed, on his side, the side that had been empty for 3 weeks. "I owe you an apology," he said. She didn't turn around. "The interview," he said. "It's tomorrow. It was always tomorrow. I misread the date. I put my phone on silent during the electricity argument, and I never turned it back on. The reschedule email sat in my inbox for 4 days, and I never saw it because I wasn't speaking to you, and you were trying to hand me my laptop, and I wouldn't look." Silence. "Maria." She turned over. Her eyes were wet. His were too. "I know," she said. He blinked. "You know? I saw the email 2 days ago," she said quietly. "I didn't know if I should tell you." He absorbed this. "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was waiting," she said, "to see if you would figure it out. And I was afraid that if I told you, you would take it as me trying to fix things again. And I couldn't take one more thing that I did for you being turned into something you resented." He looked at her. "That's not fair," he said softly. "I know," she said. "Neither was I." The storm came in at midnight, an Atlanta winter storm. Not snow, but wind and rain, and the kind of darkness that makes the whole world feel smaller and more immediate. The power flickered. The lights went out. Neither of them moved to the breaker box. They just sat in the dark. "I stopped talking to you," he said, "because I thought it was easier." "I stopped talking to you," she said, "for the same reason." That's the worst reason. It's the most human reason. He reached over in the dark, found her hand. She let him. "I'm going to win that contract," he said. "I know you are." "And when I do, don't," she said. "Don't tell me what comes after. Just come back and tell me about the interview, like you used to, when we used to tell each other things." He was quiet. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The rain hit the windows. The candles they'd lit cast soft moving light across the walls. And somewhere in that house, in every room, on every surface, the sticky notes waited. Yellow, white, blue, covered in arguments and sarcasm, and small declarations, and one signed note in handwriting neither of them had written. In the morning, Richard walked through every room and peeled them down, one by one, carefully, folding each one rather than crumpling it. Maria watched from the kitchen doorway. When he was done, she brought a small wooden box down from the closet shelf, the kind you keep things in when you want to remember them and never repeat them. He filled the box. He put the lid on. He picked up one final sticky note. Blank, yellow, ordinary. He wrote 3 words. He held it out to her. "Let's talk instead." She read it. She smiled. Then she took the note, tore it in half, and took his hand. "From now on," she said, "use your voice." He smiled. "For the rest of my life. Homes don't fall apart in a single day. They crumble one quiet moment at a time, one unread email, one silenced phone, one door you stood outside of for 23 seconds and didn't knock." Richard and Maria Brooks never needed a judge, a referee, or a therapist. They needed the courage to stop performing their marriage and start living it. They needed to stop leaving notes and start leaving doors open. Because the truth of what happened in that house, the full, complicated, humbling truth, is that nobody won. Nobody was completely right, and nobody was completely wrong. They were 2 people who loved each other so much that hurting each other was easy, and forgiveness felt like losing. Until the night the lights went out, and all they had was each other's voices in the dark. And it turned out that was enough. That had always been enough. The only note that ever mattered was the one they never wrote. The one that said, "I choose you." Every single day. I choose you.